Sports USA. And I want to welcome everyone to the second webinar that we're conducting for our Warfighter Sports program individuals who are offering these programs across the country. The first one was on post-traumatic stress disorder, and this one is going to be on traumatic brain injury. We're very, very honored and appreciative of the support that the Bob Woodruff Foundation has given to us to enable us to offer these programs. I think that we all agree as organizations that are serving severely wounded with traumatic brain injury that this is an extremely important subject. According to General Peter Chiarelli, who's the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army, over 66% of the most severely wounded soldiers returning from Afghanistan and Iraq have the invisible injuries of brain trauma and post-traumatic stress. So we realize that the individuals that we are serving are going to be those who have this type of challenge, and we need to know how to deal with it. We're again joined by dozens of our chapters as well as many of our national program partners, and we hope that this will benefit you all as you serve those with severe injuries in 2012. I'd like to now introduce Julia Ray, Disabled Sports USA's Program Services Manager. She's been with us now for 8 years. She has extensive experience dealing with wounded warriors as well as individuals with disabilities. So Julia, do you want to come on?
Thank you, Kirk. So before I introduce our presenter today, I just wanted to talk through the protocol for this presentation. It's going to be approximately 1 hour in length. Mala is going to go ahead and do the presentation, and then we will accept questions at the end. So please use the questions tab to the right of your screen if you'd like to pose a question, and we will go ahead and address that at the end there. Anything that we do not get to, we will make sure that some follow-up happens. But we expect the presentation to be approximately 1 hour with questions about 1 hour and 15 minutes in length. So welcome everybody to this webinar. This is a very important topic for our programming, and we really appreciate you all taking the time to be here. And with that, I'm going to introduce Marla Knox. She is the Recreation Therapist and Balboa Warrior Athlete Program Manager at Naval Medical Center, San Diego. She will be taking us through this presentation today. So thank you, Marla.
You're welcome, Julia. Thank you, DSUSA, for the invite and this opportunity. And thank you, everyone listening on the webinar. Okay, so last time we talked about individuals with post-traumatic stress disorder. Today we're going to be talking about individuals, how to work effectively as a team member with individuals with traumatic brain injury. So we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, so the goal of this session, much like the other ones, we did some tweaking of it, but it's for those of you who have not really had a lot of experience working with a military setting and military personnel. It's understanding the rec therapy process in a military setting, particularly for us, Naval Medical Center, San Diego, increase knowledge of TBI populations, and to educate you as the audience strategies of working with SMs, which means service members experiencing traumatic brain injury, and to provide information learned for community programs to implement programs for individual TBI. Secondly, it's to bridge the communication gap between not just us and you, but also there's another layer on the top end of it, which is the military, the chain of command. It's not the therapy aspect of it in the military setting. It's the chain of command that dictate orders and things like that to the service members. They are learning as well. Decrease numbers of individuals that attend your programs. I think maybe a year ago or so, there wasn't a lot of numbers of individuals. You guys would have these amazing programs, but what happened is that you weren't getting the numbers that you were hoping for. So hopefully with more understanding with the DSU USA chapters and the staff and the military realizing there's a better understanding, the numbers will increase. Okay, so I know some of you have already heard this, but we'll go over it again because it's really, really important. Things to consider when working with a military population. Many organizations use the word veterans, and it's a word that can be used in different ways. Veterans can be, they're no longer active duty. many of our patients at Walter Reed or Bethesda, BAMC, Naval Medical Center are still active duty. So when you reach out to a hospital setting, that's Department of Defense, just realize they're not veterans yet. They perhaps, a majority of them will be when they retire, medically retire, but currently the ones that we are bringing to your programs are active duty. Through the VA and other satellite organizations or chapters of the VA, they are veterans, but it's really important to know the difference. Really know your service branches. Many people use the word soldiers to encompass all military. That is not true for all the different branches. So for instance, Marines are Marines, Army is soldiers, Navy is sailors, so on and so forth. So not everyone is a soldier, not everyone is Marine, and not everyone's a sailor. So really make an effort to know your branches and address that accordingly. One of the biggest things that I noticed when I came in at the hospital, and I had a lot of community rec therapy experience, that the registration forms, your current registration forms, were not conducive to the military population. I know many of you have worked with individuals with Down syndrome or autism or spinal cord injury, cerebral palsy, spina bifida, but you really need to focus on amputations. That's a huge thing, and many of you probably already do, but also a traumatic brain injury and knowing the, asking the right questions to best suit that population, as well as PTSD. So make those changes, review your application, and make sure they encompass for those populations. You also need to know that all our patients here at the hospital, and this goes across the board for DOD, need to be medically and ethically cleared. Medically cleared is not just one signature. We utilize the whole rehab team here, and that could be individuals, the physiatrist, which is a rehab doctor, physical therapist, occupational therapist, prosthetics, psychology, rec therapy, case manager, so on and so forth. So it's not just one signature, it's a lot. It could be up to 10 different signatures to go on a DSUSA chapter trip. So the other thing that's really, really important is to include all the activities that you think that you might offer during that particular event. So if you were to offer it when we get there and say, hey, we're going to add this too, well, don't be surprised if maybe one of the providers says, I'm sorry, we weren't cleared for that. And you might think it's something as simple as bowling. Well, guess what? With somebody with TBI, bowling could be a challenging experience and maybe not good if they have arm pain or shoulder pain or hand pain. So we're not trying to be difficult. We just need to follow protocol. So really make sure that all your activities you're going to offer are listed. Ethical clearance, that's why we start the process a couple months out. Once we have everybody medically cleared and the applications are filled out, we have to approach the gift fund to accept that gift. And therefore, we also ask for proffer letters to make sure the staff can go and it breaks down the expense of the trip, that type of thing. So be aware of that. You as an organization really need to work closely with the clinical staff, whether it's PT, OT, that's your point of contact, a rec therapist, and work with that clinician to determine what the patient's problems are, what concerns maybe the clinician has, so on and so forth. And really, in all sincerity, the chapters, DSUSA chapters and partners, we really consider you a part of our rehab team, extended rehab team. And what we mean by that is, we do things here daily, all the time, activity daily, all the time, but you are offering a more extensive type of treatment that we can't offer. So working together and being a part of a team with you is really important to us. Really important that you all know, and maybe you guys are learning this, not everyone that is in the hospital setting is combat injured. OEF is Operation Enduring Freedom, which is Afghanistan. OIF is Operation Iraqi Freedom. So you might see an individual who is an amputee, but they didn't incur that injury in combat or OEF, OIF. It could be a motorcycle accident or car accident or something like that. Same with traumatic brain injury. And same with PTSD. There's different types of PTSD as we talked about, but you need to not assume that by looking at someone, the injury was incurred that way. So when you're recruiting for participants from the different entities, military entities, you need to really be clear on your patient population that you're recruiting. So if it's OEF, OIF only, please make make the point of contact at the hospital aware of that. And just know, as frustrating as it can be, the military is a different type of animal. I had worked for a municipality for 20 years. I ran my own foundation, which was a DSUSA chapter. And I really didn't understand why things were the way they are at the military until I got in here. So there's a lot of things, red tape, things that come up at the last minute that pulls a participant away from a program. We will do our best to fight for them to stay in, but sometimes, you know, we don't have the power. So just know that the military is a whole different type of animal. I'm not going to really get into, I think the majority of you know what recreation therapy is, but just real quickly, we took out some of those slides that are more admin. But just real quickly, it is a valid treatment intervention, if you will, that is under the umbrella of physical medicine. So just like physical therapy, occupational therapy, psychology, so on and so forth, recreation therapy under the credentials, the guidelines of rehab medicine, rec therapy is that as well. And it's not just fun and games. We use various interventions, activity-based interventions to work on the overall rehab goal. We work in partnership with our other providers. So, you know, when patients come in, you know, we talk about the aspect of what rec therapy is and how it affects somebody from a psychosocial perspective, physical, leisure education perspective. And I'll talk more about that in the next slide. So I just want to tell you how it starts. A doctor, a primary care manager, psychologist, so on and so forth, makes the recommendation to us. They send us a consult to see the patient. We call for an appointment, and an appointment is made. They are assessed by myself, and deficits, barriers to participation are established depending on the diagnosis. For this particular case, it is TBI. Goals and objectives are established based on the deficits and what we want to work on. A medical clearance for our everyday rec therapy treatment-based activities also has to be signed off, just like the special events. And then that assessment is scanned into their medical file. It's really important that you know that, you know, some of my staff come up and say, if we're at one of your events, and say, how did so-and-so do today? It's not because we're checking on you, it's because we need to chart on their progress, and we want to see progress with them if they're having challenges, and work with you, again, as our rehab partner to improve and progress that particular patient towards a successful participation and independence in that particular activity. Okay, so what is traumatic brain injury? Well, it's many things, but the initials are TBI, as you can see there. It really is a signature injury for OEF, OIF, and it's because of all the blast injuries. Here at Naval Medical Center, we have hundreds of amputees, and that doesn't even include just those that are invisibly wounded with TBI. So it's really a prevalent signature injury, and it's so subtle. So we're going to learn a little bit about it today. The brain is physically injured by sudden trauma force, and it could, for our particular case, it could be a concussive blast injury or explosive, and as we all know, it's definitely increasing. But it also could be from motor vehicle accidents, falls. We've had people, an anchor got loose and it hit somebody in the head. It could be from many different things, a fight, whatever the case might be, and the end result could be, or usually is, traumatic brain injury. It is very, just like all the people we work with, whether it's spina bifida, spinal cord injury, so on and so forth, there's certain characteristics that are prevalent to that particular diagnosis. However, each individual is different, and we have to remember that, you know, you might think, you know, oh, they're going to do this, this, and this. Well, you know that we have to look at the individual as that person first and then figure out what the characteristics of that disability is with that person. Invisible or walking wounded is another term for that, because it looks like Joe still, but it's not Joe because of other issues he has. Just a little bit about mild traumatic brain injury, behaviors and functions. Let's talk about fatigue. And there's two different types of fatigue. There's physical fatigue, basically, and we all know what physical fatigue is. But there's also cognitive fatigue, and that's really just their brain is on overload from information, or they're trying to process information that's given to them, and they get tired mentally, cognitively, their brain just gets tired. And so as you are providing instruction, you need to know that. If you know somebody that has traumatic brain injury, especially a recent injury, you need to realize, you need to kind of observe them and say, am I giving them too much information? Do they look confused? Do they look dazed? And just know that. And even ask them, is this too much? Headaches, very, very common with TBI. And it's most often caused by physical activity. So that's another thing. If they look, they have stress in their eyes, strain, ask them, do you have a headache? And, on a scale of 1 to 10, what is that headache? Obviously, if it's a 7, 8, something like that, you probably want to stop, give them a break, and see how they're feeling. If it's a 1 or 2, obviously see how they're feeling to see if they can push on too. But if it's at a high level, definitely give them an out on whatever activity you're providing them. I think everyone knows short-term memory loss. You give them directions on skiing, 3 different things at one time, maybe they'll remember one thing. So just be aware of that and kind of gauge who you're working with and what they're able to capture and sustain, what information. Poor attention, concentration, sleep disturbances, dizziness, loss of balance. This is so important, obviously, with snowboarding and snow skiing, that type of thing. So just know in your application, ask them about their vestibular. Do they get dizzy? Do they get headaches? Do they lose their balance? Do they get nauseated? We went on a hike to Torrey Pines here in San Diego, and I would consider it one of our easiest hikes. I took a group of individuals with TBI. They had such a hard time. I mean, it was an easy hike. They had such a hard time. One of them threw up because he was nauseated. The other, very dizzy. So just know this, if you're having a summer program or whatever the case might be, you have to be the one to gauge that, because they probably won't say it too much, but you got to be the one to gauge it. Okay, so moderate TBI, behaviors and function, trouble organizing thoughts. They might have a lot of thoughts or whatever the case, but to organize it in a normal pattern is something that they have trouble with. They easily get confused, and that's one of the things. Like last year, we had these 2 great skiers that were outdoing our instructors, and when it came to Saturday at Ski Spectacular, I did not want them to be by themselves because I knew they would get easily confused or make bad judgment and maybe crash into the trees. So it all worked out, but they could present very high functioning like normal, but it's that hidden, that invisible wounds that you guys aren't aware of. Always kind of go on the side of caution and just do your best to protect them from a situation that you thought, oh, I thought they were okay, but they're not. So always err on the side of caution. Vertigo, dizziness, and vestibular dysfunction. Our vestibular system, it keeps us balanced. It keeps us from falling down. When a TBI happens, it is the ability to stay balanced and not become dizzy is affected. So that's a really, really huge one. Often forgetful. It's not that they're trying to be disrespectful to you. You might say, well, gosh, we went over this yesterday. And you might re-ask them the next day, so what did we learn on Tuesday? I don't remember. Again, it's not because they're not trying. They may not really remember. Difficulty solving problems. You might not want them to lead on a hike or, the ski run, that type of thing. So if you have them do some problem solving or decision making, make it small and just to see how they are in the decision making before you give them big things. So to gauge their success in small decision-making or problem-solving abilities, and then work from there. Difficulty planning is another thing. I'm not sure who's all online right now, what you offer, but if you ever have like them involved in planning, which I love. I mean, I love when they can be involved in planning. They might have problems with that. So again, you might have to guide them and cue them, as to which decisions to make. But if you can do that, that would be wonderful. And we talked about already problems in judgment. Okay. I'm going to go back for a second. Sorry, you guys. Hold on. Okay. All right. So behaviors and feelings that lead to barriers to participation. My screen isn't all the way up. I don't know what's going on here, but okay. Decreased inhibition. So I hope everybody understands that inability to filter. Sometimes a traumatic brain injury, a part of their brain that was injured regulates their good judgment and ability to filter. So what I mean by that is they might think that you and I might think something. We may see a pretty woman or a handsome man, and we might just think, oh, you know, they're pretty or handsome, whatever the case might be. Sometimes the guys will say, or the patients will say, inappropriate things. And you have to, like, obviously you have to use your gauge as to if that's offensive to you or anybody else around, and kind of cue them that, hey, you know, watch where you're at, that kind of thing. That, I don't know if that also includes cussing. If anybody works around the military population, you know they're excellent at cussing. So you have to, like, use your best judgment to help cue them. But you don't ever have to put up with anything that's highly inappropriate. And you can, you know, talk to the staff at the hospital if you're not comfortable talking to that patient, and they should, you know, handle it. Or if you're not with a staff member, and if some of the guys come independently or the patients come independently to your programs, I would, you know, definitely not be afraid to talk to them and just explain the situation. You're in front of children. You're at a public setting. That was inappropriate. Let's, you know, cool out on that type of thing. So please do that. Just difficulty describing situations or explaining. You might ask them, how did that run fill, or whatever the case might be. They may have a hard time word-finding difficulties, or they might know what they want to say in their brain, but to be able to verbalize that, it could be difficult. One of the things about it that you might want to consider, I'm not sure how severe your populations are. We have mild to moderate here at the hospital. But for those that have language difficulties, communication difficulties, some form of expressive aphasia where they know what they want to say but they can't express it, really important to think about ways you can communicate with them. One of the things that I have learned the hard way is don't finish the sentence for them. Don't throw the word you think they're guessing or they're trying to say. It could, you know, it's kind of humiliating, and you just got to be patient and give them time to try to say the word. If they can't say the word, there's other ways to communicate, right? They can write the word down, or they can point to something, or one of our guys, one of our Navy SEALs who was injured, he had a severe traumatic brain injury. He speaks by communicating on an iPad, or speech therapy has given him a device to type in, and the device speaks for him after he types in what he wants to say. There's lots of ways to communicate with them, so know that. And sometimes the other thing about it is they have slurred speech or difficult to understand. One of the things I really want to stress is, I've seen this done before. Somebody will say, oh yeah, I know what you're talking about, and not have any idea what that patient is talking about, that service member is talking about. And that's kind of condescending. If you don't understand what they're saying, again, we talked about ways that you can communicate with them. But to say, oh yeah, I understand, and you have no idea, ask them to repeat it, maybe once or twice, or have them write it down, point to something, you know, whatever it takes to communicate. So, you know, it could be a communication board, the things we talked about, but don't be condescending if you can help it, and say, oh yeah, because it's uncomfortable that you're not getting what they're saying, and you don't want them to get frustrated. So please think of that. Emotional neurological disorder character. Okay, so I think somebody took my words out. Okay, there is a word called lability, and what that means is, for some unknown reason, it's a neurological disorder, and what happens is they cry or laugh or something uncontrollably, and it's really at an inappropriate time. So it could be at a really sad part of, like, if you take them to a movie or whatever, or somebody's giving a speech at a banquet, and it's, you know, heart-wrenching, and in a normal situation, people may be touched by it and cry. Sometimes with TBI or stroke, it's very similar with stroke as well, they will laugh inappropriately to a sad situation. And if they're not trying to be rude, it's just, this is something that is part of the disorder. Or if something's funny, they'll cry, you know, or it doesn't have to be laugh, the opposite. It's just, it's unexplained and it doesn't make sense. They cry or laugh at that particular time, and there's something that's triggered in their brain that has them do that. So again, it's not that they're being disrespectful. It's just a part of their diagnosis and the behaviors of it. Okay, so poor pragmatics in group situations. What I mean by that, if you, depending on what you offer in your chapter or your particular program, you be observant, because sometimes it's so subtle. So pragmatics in group situations, taking turns, basic social skills. Are they listening when others are speaking? Are they interrupting? Are they following the conversation? That type of thing. So that is something that you guys should be aware of, in your programs. I'm not sure exactly how that would affect your individual programs, but something to consider. Poor initiation. Some might be raring to go, and others might just sit there because they're not really sure, and that's a part of their brain that, from an initiation standpoint, you would hope they'd be more eager, but they lack initiation. Again, that's just part of the characteristic of TBI. Decreased confidence relating to their traumatic brain injury. I used to be able to do that, but now that I have short-term memory deficit, poor balance, I get headaches, I get nauseated, I don't know. So and notice that. Poor attention and focus, again, probably ties into the initiation and follow-through. So it all kind of ties in together. This last one, increased discomfort in stimulating crowded areas. I was thinking about that one. If somebody has TBI and PTSD, they really have the double whammy, especially when it comes to large crowds, different environments. So you would hopefully know somebody has the double whammy of PTSD, TBI by your application, but this also, the uncomfortableness in crowds applies to TBI, individuals with TBI. Okay, so severe TBI, behaviors and functional aspects of this particular level. So they would have decreased mobility due to impaired motor control. Again, we talked about balance, coordination, vertigo deficits, vestibular deficits, okay, poor pacing, and insight deficits. Individuals with TBI, like we talked about, they present so high functioning, especially the mild to moderate cases. Poor pacing, what that means is they might be, okay, on the opposite end of that. We talked about poor initiation. Some might be on the other extreme of that, and they might say, let's do this, let's get going, let's hurry, hurry, hurry. And they might ski the heck out of something or board the heck out of something, and then just not have the ability to pace themselves. That's what we need you as staff to say, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is the time we have. And even if they seem excited and say, I want to do 10 runs before, noon or whatever the case, and typically it would be maybe 6 runs. It's going to be up to you as that one-on-one instructor or that program provider to help set the pace, because they're not using good judgment. And they don't have good insight to their personal deficits. They want to present higher functioning, but they really don't have that good insight. Cognitively, we already talked about some of these. Attention problems, difficulty with attention, concentration, distractibility. Distractibility is very prevalent in TBI. So sometimes in more severe cases, if you're teaching, you might want to get away from the crowds, stimulus, that type of thing, and speak one-on-one to that person so they're not distracted by noise or other people or whatever the case might be. Sometimes those of you that have chapters that offer ski or snowboard, we all know how busy and overcrowded the place can be in the morning when they start, when they get ready to get their equipment and instruction and that kind of thing. So somebody severe, really try to make an effort to be more isolating so that you can pass the information without distracting them. Perseveration, that's a new word for a lot of individuals that maybe don't work in the rehab field. What perseveration is they might focus on one thing. So for instance, if you have a particular shirt on, this is just an example, they might say, nice shirt, nice shirt. You might say, thank you. I really like your shirt. Where'd you get your shirt? So that's when perseveration is when they just grasp onto a topic or an object or something, and they can't get past that. So it's really important to redirect them, as to, okay, thank you for the compliment on my shirt. Now let's talk about what you're going to be doing today, whether it's skiing, boarding, whatever the case that each program offers. So you have to redirect them and hopefully distract them from their perseveration, whatever that object or topic might be. Okay, what's really, really important when working with individuals with TBI is providing structure for them. So one of the things that Ski Spectacular is doing this year is going to be great, is they're giving the schedule of activities for the week to our patients ahead of time. And that's going to be really good because they're going to know going into it, you know, it's a rough schedule, but they're going to know when they're going to ski. They're going to know, or board. They're going to know when they're going to do Nordic skiing or the sled hockey or whatever the case is at the nighttime. So providing that structure is really, really important. And you know, you can do it for the week, for the 3 days, for daily, whatever works for your particular program. So whether it's providing a piece of paper or emailing it to them, whatever the case might be, everything that you can provide ahead of time to the hospital staff and the patients would be very much appreciated. Following a schedule, believe it or not, is a good thing for our population. Lastly, on this particular slide, they have a decreased safety awareness, and again, according to their lack of insight to their deficits. So again, I gave you that example. We had 2 guys, probably double, triple black diamond skiers. The instructors had to come in and change over at lunchtime because our guys were out skiing them. Even though they displayed amazing skiing ability, I would not let them go out on a Saturday by themselves because I was afraid that they would demonstrate poor judgment and crash into trees. So what happened is the ski instructors that they had came in that Saturday and skied with them, and it was amazing, and it worked out really good. But don't be fooled if they have TBI, and if the staff member's there from a organization or a hospital setting, a military organization for hospital, please talk to them. Just don't say, okay, I'll see you on your own. Okay, speech and language, we already talked about this. Okay, there's 2 different types of aphasia. There's expressive aphasia, where they know what they want to say in their head, but they can't express it verbally. So again, we talk about ways to communicate, how you can help them communicate. But there's also receptive aphasia. And what receptive aphasia is you might be telling them instructions, right? And they might be nodding their head and agreeing with you, so you think everything's okay. Well, in reality, they may have only grasped 1 or 2 of the things that you gave them. If you give them a 5 things of instruction to do, and they may be shaking their head, and then you're ready to go, they may only have grasped 1 or 2. So please, even though they're shaking their head, use methods or tools to say, okay, what is the first thing we're going to do? You know, what is the second thing? That type of thing. What can you repeat back to me the instructions I gave you? I mean, obviously do it in such a way that it's respectful, but these are things that will help cue you and give you a better understanding of what they grasp. Remember, in TBI, it's an issue of processing. So saying that, you can tell them 4 or 5 things, but really start them slow. It reminds me sometimes of spina bifida. Spina bifida is the same way in the processing. They can't grasp a lot of information at one time. TBI is the same thing. So just be aware of that, and not just you as staff members, really communicate that to your volunteers as well. It happens to us all the time. I see it at golf. I see it at tennis, all those type of things. So really break it down to more simple, and if you see they grasp something more completely, keep moving forward in your instruction. Okay. The other thing about just another couple of speech and language things, they may speak very fast or may speak very slow. I think we all have experienced that. So again, those that are speaking extremely slow, it's hard sometimes when we're really busy to stay there and listen. So be mindful of that and try not to finish their sentences, you know, show respect, and maybe it's a good idea to have a volunteer that has a little bit more time, you know, try to sit there and communicate with that particular individual if it's a timing issue. They may have problems reading and they may have problems writing. You probably will see this reflected in your application, so just know this as well. Okay, let's talk a little bit about activities that that you guys might be able to offer or you can consider when you're, whatever, I'm not sure your programs, but I'll just give you some ideas what we do here. So we really try to have activities offered that challenge their ability to strategize, make decisions, process information, and problem solve. So some of the ones that we do is we co-treat with occupational therapy and physical therapy. So whether it's scavenger hunts in the community, board games, and why board games? Because there's rules, there's strategies, there's, might be communication if you're partnering up in board games. Team sports, we work on vestibular issues, eye-hand coordination, ability to strategize, lateral movement up and down, that type of thing. They have to plan, they have to organize, and lead. Cooking activity. I know many of you don't offer cooking activities, but I was thinking about, many of you do have restaurant activities at night. I'll use the Sun Valley Wood River Ability Program. We had a chef come in and cook for us, but after kind of thinking about this later, it would have been good to include some of our patients with TBI involved in the cooking. And we break it down to all the steps. Think about all the steps in cooking or a game or whatever. So cooking as an example, planning a menu, shopping for it, making a budget, follow a recipe, and we assess the ability to follow directions, safety awareness in the kitchen, focus on pacing that activity, that cooking activity, know when to take a break, increase awareness, and know their limits and deficits coming into it if you can, or learn it as you go. The other thing is, like we already talked about this, is use of written schedule for clients to follow. A notepad, writing it down on a simple notepad, phone applications, whatever access you have to different things, we suggest that you use it the most you can with this particular clientele. So these are some activities that work hand in hand with patients with vestibular issues. Believe it or not, maybe some of your summer programs definitely include hiking and have different types of hike, from beginning to intermediate to more advanced. We're hoping to we hike every Wednesday morning, and it's, I would say it's intermediate to advanced, but we are also hoping to climb Mount Whitney in August and train for that at San Jacinto and Gargonial and Mount Baldy. So for those that are medically cleared and whatnot. So think about that in your summer activities. Or snowshoeing. Volleyball, why volleyball? Because it's a lot of looking up, looking down. We talked about, visual disturbances, I don't know if I talked about that, dizziness, double vision, that type of thing. So activities that promote, yes, it will give them a headache, but, we want to expose them a little bit so they can kind of move forward in progress of rehab. Foursquare is another one we've used. I know this doesn't apply to many of you. This is more of a hospital setting, but hopefully it's cueing you to some things that maybe you can do in your activities. Sports such as tennis, softball, even kickball. Swimming is a great one because it's not the actual act of swimming, but it's always positive. But there's also a lot of pool activities, from doing things like torpedoes, log rolls, somersaults, handstands, that works on all their vestibular aspects. So you can consider that in some of your programs. Many of you might already offer paddleboard, but that's an excellent activity for individuals with TBI. We offer surfing every Thursday here, so it kind of ties into snowboarding. So know that, and of course skiing. You may, we also already talked about activities that may or may not trigger a headache. Again, it's not a bad thing if somebody gets a headache. It's up to you as the leader, if you will, the person leading that activity, to gauge the headache. And some of you may want to do a baseline. Okay, everybody, do you have any physical, problems going on? What is the rate of that? Is it on a scale of 1 to 10, whether it's maybe just physical pain, maybe with headaches, we talk about that. So, what's your starting headache? It might be a 1 or 2. I always gauge in the middle of an activity. What's your headache now? It could be a 4. And at the end, what's your headache? It could be a 5 or 6. Again, if the headache is the number is high, definitely take a break and stop that activity for that particular patient. Okay, we talked about hikes on various terrains, swimming, tennis, eye-hand coordination. Golf is another great one, whether it's disc golf, golf classes, golf tournaments, miniature golf, that type of thing. It's great for eye-hand coordination. So a couple challenges to overcome. Just checking our time. We're good. Understanding from chain of command. Again, we get frustrated when the chain of command here at the hospital isn't understanding the benefits of what we're doing from a therapeutic recreation standpoint, but we're definitely educating them. For For TBI, there could be accusations of malingering, meaning you're faking it, or exaggeration. Oh, he seems to be okay. I saw him doing this, this, and this. I can't believe, you know, he can't do his PT as a Marine or what everybody else does. We don't get into that. We follow through on that particular patient's diagnosis, and that's what we judge them on. Again, routine and set schedule is key for this population. The other thing is you're disabled, very much like PTSD. It's invisible. They're walking wounded without, you know, a physical observed disability. So it looks like Joe, but it's not Joe. There seems to be a huge disconnect of family education and support, and therefore, you know, relationships are challenged and stressed. So that's why it's really, really important as you as providers of these great community-based programs that you do your best to try to include family, because disability happens to the whole family, whether it's just a husband and wife or you know, a husband and wife with kids, that type of thing. I know, you know, your budgets are tight and money's tight as a nonprofit, but if you can consider, you know, offering to a family member, and they might bring their mom or dad or a good buddy or something like that, it's important that those family members or good buddies realize there's all the things they can do even with disability, and how as they move forward in their rehabilitation, there are these great programs that are out there that they can utilize, and how they can best help their loved one who's disabled on how to be successful in whatever activity they choose. The other thing is, I think, a disconnect that I was thinking about yesterday is there's a lack of community programs. Really, there's not a lack of community programs, tons of them. But what it is, the service members do not know of all these great organizations that offer this. And they might say, wow, I was in the hospital 2 years, and I didn't know about DSUSA. Well, we do our best to do that, but the education is ongoing. So with your help as providers as well, educating them, taking them to Ski Spectacular, and so on and so forth, is oftentimes a jumping off point to getting involved in things as they transition out and med board out. Let's see. Okay. This is a really big one as well, but I feel like it's getting better. As I came to the hospital, I mentioned that I had many years of experience in municipality doing adaptive sports at the City of San Diego, and then the San Diego Adaptive Sports Foundation. You know, I was on the side that you guys were trying to get access and trying to gain insight to how to best work with this population. But now that I see, a lot of times organizations will come in and say, this is what we want to do. This is what I think is going to be best, without a conversation to the providers at the hospital. Tell me about your population. Tell me what their needs are. How can we best support them? I think a beginning conversation is really important, and working together cohesively, collaboratively, building consensus between what you guys offer and what we offer at the hospital is really important, and working together to make sure that our rehab goals for the patients align with, actually your programs align with our rehab goals for our patients. I can speak for myself. I don't know if any other clinicians out there in the military, we always put our patients first and whatever is best for the patients. And we will fight for that, you know, and luckily and fortunately we have so many great organizations approach us, but if an organization is not going to listen to what us or what we say as clinicians what's best for our patients, we'll probably say thanks but no thanks, because it doesn't align. It's nothing personal against the organization, it's just our missions don't align, and so therefore it's probably better to say thanks but no thanks. Remember, in TBI, much like PTSD, some days are better than others, and that goes across the board for all disability, doesn't it? Don't assume, we already talked about this, that all combat injured share the same experiences. We talked about this in PTSD, and that relates to all individuals with disabilities, even if they have the same label, if you will. It's not going to be the same. This diagnosis is for a lifetime. They will always have traumatic brain injury. There's no quick fix. It could, you see improvement sometimes right away. Sometimes it takes 6 months to a year, and then sometimes it's a plateau point, and that's as good as they're going to get. So 2 years out, I would say it's probably as good as it's going to get. But we do see a lot of recovery in the first couple months, 6 months to a year. So if anybody has any questions, concerns or comments, I'd be happy to take them.
Thank you very much, Marla. There's a lot of useful, practical information for the participants. And I'm going to go ahead and invite anybody who has questions to definitely get those in using the question bar on the right-hand side of their page now. So please feel free to pop those in there, and I'll bring them up to you. And we do have one or two for you. I'm also going to ask that anybody who is on this presentation complete the quick survey for us. Just let us know what you think of this webinar. And we will, I know we also had some folks ask if they can get copies of the presentation. This, with the audio, will be sent out to people with the PTSD one that was done as well. Another piece of information I wanted to provide for Disabled Sports USA chapters, Marla has referenced some sample forms, application forms, confirmation emails that we've come up with over the years, and they're within the Disabled Sports USA program guidelines as well. So if you're a chapter, please do ask me for those. I'd be happy to provide them for you. So Marla, I just wanted to ask you a question from a participant.
Okay.
We get this fairly commonly, but it is also an ongoing thing that we have to deal with is outreach, and I guess specifically to those with traumatic brain injury, but in general with the population you work with, and finding out ways to connect with your patients, and then also outreach to veterans that are in the VA system. And I want to get your feedback on this, Marla, but I also want to let those know on the call that Disabled Sports USA, if you are a chapter member, we have resources and have had quite a few years of experience in working with both active duty patients, different military medical centers, as well as VA facilities. So we have a pretty exhaustive database of service members that's been through our program. In fact, we have almost 5,000 wounded warriors, their family, and hospital staff on our database, and that's something that chapters should definitely talk to us because we've been doing it quite some time. But from your perspective, Marla, how would you suggest is the best way to connect? Would you say it's flyers? Are there listservs that these guys are looking at? What sort of feedback do you have for us?
Okay, well, I would start by saying, what's tricky is that sometimes it's your entry, first of all, it's your entry point to that particular facility. So for Department of Defense, there are many, we have med holds here, medical holds that some of the guys stay at. For instance, there's probably 100 at the on the Marine side, maybe 70 on the sailor side, and less for Army. Well, what happens sometimes is the outside agency will, the entry point will be maybe a section leader or a sergeant, that type of thing. And what happens sometimes is that section leader or sergeant is not medical. So they're not getting it, they're not thinking of it the same way as a provider would be. And also the way that the military works is there's a lot of turnover. You might be dealing with one particular sergeant one season of the ski season or whatever the case might be the year previously, and that person's gone the next time. And that the new person may not know anything about you or be interested in what you offer. So, of course, I'm biased. I feel that, because it's a medical facility with BAMSP, Bethesda, Naval Medical Center, so on and so forth, that it's really important that you find the right therapist. Of course, I'd like to see it offers direct therapy, but you can go in through PT, physical therapy, or occupational therapy first and foremost, working with that patient, because they will ensure to get the medical clearance and the ethics clearance to accept the gift. So I would do that. The other thing is I've noticed some organizations are trying to go through the patient. We really frown upon that because I think the disconnect is you're not considering they're still patients and they're still active duty. So to get all the right paperwork and to make sure we're not putting the patient or the service member in any type of jeopardy based on their medical condition, go through the clinician. As far as continuing to have access to our patients, it seems like it's still probably a challenge. I would say do your best to work cooperatively and cohesively with a point of contact at the hospital. I think the biggest challenge is finding the right point of contact and building that trust and rapport. We have hundreds of organizations contact us, with their idea of, I won't say what activities because I don't want anybody to be offended. Again, it always comes down to what the patients want. You may feel that what you're offering is the best in the whole world. And because we get so much offered to us, that we do a really good vetting process. Do the rehab goals align? Are they willing to work, listen to what we're asking and work with us and build that rapport? I mean, there's so many great organizations through DSUSA that we really enjoy working with because I find them to be gold standards. There's some organizations that our missions don't match. So I would say build that rapport with that staff member, work hand in hand with them, and then maybe you can work with that staff member to come up with a plan to say, you know what, I'd really like to have access to these patients when they leave. And that's kind of what we're working with DSUSA National with Julia and her staff, is to get that information. So-and-so is going to be med boarded out. This is his information. They have a form that they can fill out, and we try to send it in. And that way, when you do have an activity and you are looking for those that are not connected to a hospital per se, but you can get your information out. The best thing to answer Julia's question is I love getting a flyer. And the reason that is, if we put the flyer up, we have a newsletter with called Resilience that we put out every 2 months. We just put out November, December. So that really motivates the patients. We put that up in rec therapy, in physical therapy, and occupational therapy. We get the word out. And our first 2 ski trips, one Ski Spectacular and the second in December, and it filled up in 1 day. We found out when the dates were. I talked to some of the patients, and they put a text blast out, and it was filled up in 1 day. Our next trip is to Park City, Utah, and it's filled up, and that was a matter of a couple weeks. So, again, build rapport, get information out, give us all the information that you can, number of participants that you're looking for, OEF, OIF. Are you offering lodging? Are you offering meals? Are you offering all the information way ahead of time? I like to say 3 months ahead of time. So if you can do what we need on our end, I feel like our numbers can be up. And I just think the whole connecting them to you after discharge from the hospital, med board out, I think it's just a constant work together as to saying, okay, so-and-so is going to be discharged. Let's get that form to DSUSA.
Thanks, Marla. It's definitely a huge topic, recruitment. And in fact, I have a whole presentation on the subject. So I'd be happy to share that with some folks. Maybe that'll be a topic for a future webinar if that is called for. There's definitely nuances that Marla has spoken to with dealing with active duty military centers as opposed to veterans and so forth. It's as I said, it's a big area. And I'd be happy to, particularly if there are chapters on the line, to help any individual chapters with the recruitment, because you can sort of tailor it depending on the people you're trying to outreach to. And then I think another important piece of advice is definitely look locally. There are warrior transition units and VAs in your communities, and they're a good place to try and develop that rapport with, as Marla spoke to. So I just want to move on, Marla, and ask another question of you from one of our volunteers from a chapter local to you, the United States Adaptive Recreation Center. They ask if they volunteer with our chapter down there, and could they volunteer with your surf program and stand-up paddleboarding programs down at the Naval Medical Center, and how would they become a volunteer with you?
Great question. Thank you. Go USARC. We'd love them to volunteer because also it provides insight, more hands-on insight to our population. How that goes about is you contact the Armed Services YMCA, which is on site here at the command. Aaron Lester is our point of contact, and you have to go through a process. Paperwork, fingerprinting, that type of thing. But if they want to email me or call me after the webinar, I'd be happy to guide them in that direction.
Great, thank you. Okay, next question. We have a participant asking, is it advantageous to offer group activities to those with a brain injury? Or is there so much individual variability that it's better that they get individual lessons? So how do you feel about the individual versus group lessons?
I think it breaks down to the activity. Obviously, something with snowboard or skiing, I would say individual. Something that's higher risk. Something like hiking, it can definitely be a group activity. But if you know that person suffers from various balance issues, vestibular issues, so on and so forth, you might want to have a knowledgeable volunteer, by them, kind of like helping them and observing them and, just being watchful of any issues that particular person might have. So it depends on the type of activity, the severity of the individual TBI. Somebody that might have more severe TBI, they probably would benefit more initially from more one-on-one. But I would say mild to moderate, which is a lot of our type of patients, it would say group activity, except on higher risk ones like, monoski. That even surfing is really, it's a group activity, but the instruction's done individually. Stand-up paddleboard, group activity, but it's done individually, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, definitely. And maybe while we're sort of in this area, do you have any advice on the length of a lesson? Do you prefer to see, specifically for those with traumatic brain injury, do you like to see, say, more shorter sessions, say 4 one-hour sessions in a day, or do you like to see a longer session and less of them? And I'm sure there's kind of a perfect time frame for attention span. Do you have any guidance on what that is?
I think, actually, that's a great question. I think it depends on the severity. For us, like hiking is 90 minutes. Surfing is a couple hours, but they'll go out and surf for maybe an hour, come back, have lunch, relax, and maybe go out again or something like that. Stand-up paddleboard is 90 minutes. Our activities go from 60 to 90 minutes, depending on, the type of activity, but that's a general type of thing. And so you said the length of it. Also, if you have a whole day activity, you may see more fatigue in the afternoon, like after lunch. So, for instance, if you're at Ski Spectacular and they're hard charging in the morning, have lunch, and then they kind of like fatigue afterwards. And that could be for a variety of reasons why they fatigue. But, I would say know what the level of TBI might be and just plan accordingly.
Great, definitely.
I think 60 to 90 minutes is an excellent, starting point for activity zones.
Okay, good to know. And then another question we have is, do you give a list of resources or programs to patients when they leave from the hospital? I know that, speaking from the perspective of Disabled Sports USA, we publish 2 calendars a year that obviously can be passed on to patients. But is there anything, you mentioned you had your publication that shows them what's available to them at the hospital. Do they get access to resources when they leave, and how do they get that information? Because I'm sure it's something some of the organizations on this call would like to get on a list of resources if there is such a thing.
I think that's a good question, and I think, and anybody that's a rec therapist out there is probably thinking to themselves, that's part of the discharge plan, and yes, you're right, it's part of the discharge plan. The tricky thing is as they med board out, so they're medically retiring. Okay, if you put yourself in their shoes, what do they think? They're thinking about moving back home, wherever home might be, finding residence, moving their family, moving their furniture. Are they going to be able to get a job? What are they going to do? Whatever the case might be. So what typically happens is the ability to recreate again as a veteran, if you will, is way down their list. So we try to provide them with the resources, that in their community, or they're calling me when they settle. Unfortunately, we don't have as structured of a program as I'd like to have, and oftentimes, if I'm not in my office, I don't even know they're leaving. So it's very different than a physical medicine rehabilitation that we might have all worked in at one point or the other. But we do our best to try to provide them resources. I don't give them a handout. Basically, the DSUSA form that we give them, and we also have a Paralympic rep that tries to give them chapters of clubs, I guess they're called clubs, of Paralympic clubs in their area. So hopefully that they'll send, they'll send. And the other thing is, I don't mind, because you do have their information once an application is sent out, but I would, before you invite them to come to one of your events, I just double check if they are active duty or not, because it's difficult when our service members are approached individually versus in a group, and then again, that breaks down the liability issues. So to answer your question, is we do our best to try to pass on information. We don't have anything formal, i.e. of all the chapters. I think that would be great. I don't know if DSUSA has a list of all the chapters breakdown in state. That would be a great resource for us if we could have it, and then we could pass it on and circle some resources for that service member as they discharge.
Yeah, it sounds like we need to help you get together a packet, which we can definitely do.
That'd be great.
Yeah. just a couple more questions here, and then we're basically done. So, how frequent is seizure activity with traumatic brain injury?
Oh, it can be very common. It can be very common. For mild to moderate, I don't see too much, but more severe, they definitely can, and that leaves a whole other issue of problems and liability, right? But again, go back to medical clearance. So if a neurologist or whoever is seeing them is clearing them for that. We did have an individual go to the Tahoe program that did have history of seizures, not relating to TBI, and she did have a couple seizures, and but she was medically cleared, and not for anything. I used to have seizures when I was growing up, and I still did things. Obviously I was a kid, but I don't have them anymore. But you don't want to stop an activity because of that, unless the doctor says don't do it because of safety. There's ways that you can keep people safe by okay, on a ski lift, you just make sure that that person knows it. But I don't want to promote that. I think it really is up to that facility, that DOD or VA or whatever the case might be, and the medical providers clearing them or not clearing them. So
yeah, that's a really important question to ask on the form, your application form, for sure.
Yeah, actually, that's a very, very good point.
Yeah. And another question I have for you, Marla, do you think that it's okay for folks with a traumatic brain injury to be participating in a group activity with other individuals with other types of disabilities, or do you think that they do better when they're participating with other people with traumatic brain injury?
No, I don't think that's the case at all. I think one of the things I learned is green is green. So I see it, hey, if it's a bunch of Marines and some have TBI and some have PTSD and some have amputations, so be it. We don't. I think there could be a perceived stigma associated with, a bunch of individual PTSD or a bunch, with TBI. I think, there's so many dual diagnoses, TBI, PTSD, TBI amputation, or the triple whammy of all three of them. So I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that, at all, because even with something like, if you say amputation, there's triple amputees and there's, single BK. So would you separate them based on ability? No. I just said just keep them all together. It depends on the activity, but you want everybody to be successful. But I don't break it down that way.
Okay. And then somebody's just asking here, how do we include the clinicians? So I'm assuming your physical therapists and your other staff people in the activities. I know what we typically do is have them participate alongside the patient, but is there any advice you have in that area?
Well, here, I can't speak about Bethesda Center for the Intrepid or anything like that, but for us at Naval Medical Center, we have a SOP, which is Standard Operation Procedures, like policies and procedures. For us is that we like one clinician member at least to go for every 5. But in bigger groups, we have a clinician and an operation person, which is the military side of that. So we, some of you, if you talk to me and you have a group, you're asking for a group of 5, I might say, can we bring a staff member, a clinician? And so I'm not quite sure what the question is to bring them on as far as activity goes, and that clinician usually is on that activity as well. Obviously, if it's skiing, if the clinician can keep up with the participant, then great. Otherwise, they'll kind of check in, like when they, come off the mountain or something to that effect. Others, for instance, I'll use the Telluride program. There were 2 clinicians that went on the trip, and we had probably 12 amputees going, and they broke the groups down into, in half. And so I went with one, and then a occupational therapist went on one as well. So it's good because we're looking out for those patients and their abilities and their limitations and so on and so forth. And there's so many well-meaning staff members and so many well-meaning volunteers. And the U.S. staff try to do your best to capture the information that you're given. And then the volunteers sometimes, there's even less of a filter. There's more of a filter that goes on for the volunteers to get that information. I was at a program this summer, and there was a volunteer who got upset with me because I was trying to flip one of our participants' cushions on the wheelchair so that the cushion side would be upside down so it wouldn't capture the heat, and therefore when the amputee sat down on it, it wouldn't be hot. and he would not listen to me. He was so focused on getting that cushion upright, even if it was sitting out there in the sun for an hour. So I think sometimes what's difficult is, you know, your understanding of why clinicians go on an activity and how we feel. We're very protective of our patients, but also, you know, trickling down that information to your staff and your volunteers. And again, not that we don't trust, you know, the community partners, but there's no one that you guys aren't going to know our patients as well as us. So again, that leads up to inviting a clinician because they are still active duty outpatients, and you know, and working hand in hand and collaboratively together for the best interest of the patient.
Thanks, Marla. And I definitely want to also reiterate something you said about the ratio of participants to clinicians, and it's important to include a clinician at the ratio that's recommended by the medical military facility that you're working with. And usually when we're doing programs, it's between 1 to 5, 1 to 7 in that range, depending on the patient's needs and the population that you're working with. Does that sound about right, Marla?
Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm.
Okay, terrific. Well, I think that got everything covered. Thank you so much, Marla. And if anybody else pops on with any questions at a later date, feel free to email myself and the other administrators who you got this presentation information from. You will receive the survey automatically when this presentation ends. And we definitely want to thank you and also the Bob Woodruff Foundation for making this presentation possible. So thank you, everybody, and thank you, Marla.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.